I'm Amanda, 29, sitting in my parents' living room during family game night with my stomach growling so loudly I can barely focus on my cards. My parents and sister Rachel are happily munching on pizza they ordered before I arrived from my hospital shift. "You should have brought snacks." "We won't order for you," my parents said dismissively, while my sister smirked and deliberately grabbed another slice. Little did they know that 3 years later, I'd be hosting them in what used to be their house, the house they lost, along with everything else. That small moment of cruelty was just one in a lifetime pattern of favoritism, but it was the moment I decided enough was enough. Before I dive into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family justice. Now, let's get into how a simple dinner refusal led to the biggest family reckoning you can imagine. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy very early on. In our house, there were two distinct categories, Rachel and everyone else. Though everyone else really just meant me. From our earliest childhood memories, the pattern was unmistakable. Rachel was the golden child, athletic, naturally social, and somehow always knowing exactly what to say to make our parents beam with pride. She was a soccer star by age 6, homecoming queen by 16, and the center of our parents' world every moment in between. When Rachel scored a goal, my parents bought championship banners to hang in our front yard. When she brought home C grades, they'd say at least she's well-rounded and take her shopping as consolation. I was different. Quieter, more thoughtful, and endlessly trying to earn what seemed to come naturally to Rachel, our parents' approval. When I brought home straight A's, the response was typically, "That's expected, Amanda. You've always been the bookworm." My academic trophies were stored in a box in the attic while Rachel's sports participation medals lined the living room shelves. The difference in how we were celebrated was particularly obvious on birthdays. Rachel's parties were legendary in our neighborhood. Bounce houses, professional entertainers, custom cakes, and guest lists that required renting out entire venues. My parents would spend months planning these extravaganzas, coordinating themes and sending elaborate invitations. My birthdays, meanwhile, were often forgotten or hastily acknowledged with a store-bought cake and a gift card. One year, when I turned 13, my parents actually scheduled a dentist appointment on my birthday afternoon and then forgot to pick me up because they were shopping for Rachel's upcoming soccer tournament. I waited outside the medical building for 3 hours before finally calling our neighbor Mrs. Johnson for a ride home. "Oh, honey, we completely lost track of time," Mom said when I walked in the door. "Rachel needed new cleats, and you know how particular she is about equipment." Family vacations followed the same pattern. Every destination was chosen to accommodate Rachel's preferences. When she went through her beach phase, we spent 3 consecutive summers in Myrtle Beach despite my severe sunburn issues. When she became interested in skiing, suddenly our family tradition became winter trips to Colorado. Meanwhile, my pleas to visit museums in Washington, D.C. or New York were dismissed as boring and too educational for a vacation. The most painful disparity came when it was time for college. Despite being valedictorian and receiving multiple academic scholarship offers, my parents insisted they couldn't afford to help me with tuition. "Student loans will teach you responsibility, Amanda," my father said. "Besides, you're smart enough to get scholarships." I did receive partial scholarships, but they didn't cover everything, forcing me to work part-time throughout college while maintaining my grades. Meanwhile, Rachel, with her mediocre GPA but athletic recruitment, received not only her parents' emotional support, but also their financial backing. They paid for her apartment off campus. "Dorms aren't conducive to an athlete's needs," they explained. "Bought her a new car, she needs reliable transportation to practice," and gave her a monthly allowance that exceeded what I made working 20 hours a week at the campus library. I took out loans, lived in cramped dorm rooms, and worked myself to exhaustion. And still, whenever I called home overwhelmed with balancing work and studies, my mother would sigh and say, "I don't know why you're complaining, Amanda." Rachel has 3-hour practices every day and still manages to enjoy college. Even our bedrooms at home reflected this inequality. Rachel had the largest bedroom in the house, formerly the master suite before my parents converted the formal dining room downstairs into their new bedroom to give Rachel more space. Her room had an ensuite bathroom, a sitting area, and a walk-in closet. My bedroom, meanwhile, was originally designed as a home office, the smallest room in the house with barely enough space for a twin bed and desk. I had to store most of my clothes in the hallway linen closet. The only person who seemed to notice this imbalance was my grandmother Margaret. She lived about an hour away and visited monthly, always making special time just for me. During our private conversations, she would ask about my achievements and interests in a way my parents never did. You know, Amanda, she told me once while helping me with a science project my parents were too busy to assist with. They were at Rachel's weekend softball tournament. I see how hard you work. And I see how they treat you differently. It's not fair, and it's not your fault. Those moments with Grandma Margaret were lifelines, rare acknowledgments that I wasn't crazy or ungrateful for noticing the disparity. She saw what was happening but was in no position to change the family dynamic. Still, her recognition kept me sane through the gaslighting that occurred whenever I dared question the status quo. "You're being selfish," Mom would say when I asked why Rachel got new clothes while I got hand-me-downs. "Your sister needs these things for her social development. Stop being jealous of your sister," Dad would admonish when I pointed out that they'd missed my Honor Society induction to attend Rachel's regular season game. Family supports each other. But it was always me supporting Rachel, never the reverse. And as we grew older, the pattern only intensified. The game night incident that changed everything happened during my second year of medical residency. I was working 60-hour weeks at the hospital while trying to maintain a perfect record in my program. That particular Thursday, I had been on my feet for 12 hours straight, dealing with a bus accident that had brought multiple trauma cases into the ER simultaneously. By the time my shift ended, I was physically and emotionally drained. My scrubs had blood stains that hadn't completely washed out, and I'd had to give a death notification to the family of a teenage girl who hadn't survived her injuries. Under normal circumstances, I would have gone straight home to crash, but it was my parents' monthly game night, an obligation I couldn't miss without hearing about it for weeks. I had texted my mom that morning. "Working late shift before game night. Will there be dinner?" Her response had been clear. "Yes, we'll have food. Don't be late this time." I'd even confirmed again before leaving the hospital. "Heading out now. Should I pick up anything for dinner?" "No need. Food taken care of," came the reply. When I pulled into my parents' driveway at 7:15 p.m., 15 minutes early based on our usual 7:30 start time, I noticed Rachel's shiny BMW already there. She still lived with our parents rent-free at age 27, despite having a marketing job that paid well enough for independence. But why pay bills when our parents were happy to cover everything? I walked in through the front door and immediately smelled pizza, my favorite food and a welcome sight after such a grueling shift. As I entered the living room, I saw my parents and Rachel already seated around the coffee table, pizza boxes open, plates full, and the game Monopoly partially set up. "You're here," my mom said without getting up. "We were just about to start without you." "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late." Got caught up with, I began explaining about the trauma cases, but my dad waved his hand dismissively. "You're always running late. We know how it is. Grab a seat and let's get started." I set down my work bag and looked around for an empty plate, noticing there were only 3 place settings. Rachel was chewing a large bite of stuffed crust pizza, her plate piled high with slices. "Is there a plate for me?" I asked, suddenly realizing they might have already finished eating. "Oh, did you not eat at the hospital?" my mom asked, raising her eyebrows. "I assumed you'd have dinner during your shift." My stomach growled audibly. I hadn't eaten since a granola bar at 10 a.m., 12 hours earlier. "I texted you asking about dinner," I said, pulling out my phone to show the message thread. "You said food was taken care of." Dad glanced at the texts and shrugged. "We meant food for us was taken care of. You should have brought something if you were hungry. Or at least called with your order," Rachel added with a smirk. "The delivery guy left like 20 minutes ago." I stared in disbelief. "So, there's nothing for me to eat?" "You should have brought snacks," my father said matter-of-factly. "We won't order for you now. It would take too long and delay the game." What made it worse was watching Rachel reach behind the couch and pull out another pizza box. "Oh look, I forgot we had a whole other pizza back here," she said with feigned surprise. She opened it, revealing a completely untouched pie, then took a slice for herself. I'm saving this for later, though. As my stomach clenched with hunger, I noticed my grandmother Margaret watching from her seat in the corner. She had been so quiet I hadn't realized she was there. The look on her face was one of barely contained fury. "James," she said to my father, her voice unusually sharp. "Your daughter just worked a 12-hour shift saving lives. She asked if there would be food. How can you sit there and eat in front of her?" The room fell uncomfortably silent. My father shifted in his seat, but Rachel jumped in before he could respond. "It's not our fault Amanda can't manage her time better," she said. "She's always using work as an excuse." "That's enough, Rachel," Grandmother Margaret said firmly. My mother, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation, tried to change the subject. "Let's just start the game. Amanda, you can be the banker since you're good with numbers." As they continued setting up the board game, I stood there, still in my scrubs, exhaustion washing over me. Something inside me just broke. This wasn't just about pizza. It was about 29 years of being treated like I was less important than my sister. I quietly walked to the kitchen, found a package of stale crackers in the pantry, and returned to the living room. As I sat down to play, no one except Grandmother Margaret seemed to notice or care about my silent defeat. After the game, which Rachel won, as usual, with suspicious rolls of the dice that no one questioned, Grandmother Margaret asked me to help her to her car. Once outside, she gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Amanda, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice low. "This isn't right. What happened tonight? What's been happening your entire life? It's not normal, and it's not your fault." "I know," I said quietly, surprised by my own admission after years of making excuses for my family's behavior. "They've always been like this, even to me," she continued, shocking me. "Your grandfather left me more than enough money to live comfortably, but your father controls most of it now. He convinced me to sign over financial power of attorney years ago. I've been afraid to speak up too strongly." She squeezed my hand. "But I'm old now, and I'm not afraid anymore. It's time things changed." As I drove home that night, surviving on those stale crackers and stopping for fast food on the way, something fundamental shifted inside me. I was done being the family doormat. Done accepting scraps of attention and affection. Done believing that somehow, if I just achieved enough or sacrificed enough, my parents would finally see me. The game night wasn't just about a missed meal. It was the moment I realized that nothing would ever change unless I changed it myself. The morning after the game night incident, I woke up with a clarity I'd never experienced before. Instead of the familiar hurt and resentment, I felt oddly calm. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling of my small apartment and thought, "This ends now." But unlike the dramatic confrontations you see in movies, I knew a loud showdown would accomplish nothing with my family. My parents had decades of practice dismissing my feelings, and Rachel had mastered the art of making herself the victim in any conflict. No, this situation required something more strategic, more patient, more comprehensive. I decided that true revenge wouldn't come from an explosive argument but from methodically rebuilding my life beyond their reach and control. Success would be my revenge, success they couldn't take credit for or diminish. First, I focused on my career. I was already a promising resident, but I doubled down on my professional development. I volunteered for extra shifts, especially the difficult ones no one wanted, earning the respect of the senior doctors. I spent my rare free time attending medical conferences and networking events, connecting with hospital board members and department heads. Dr. Winters, the chief of surgery, took particular interest in my work after I stayed 16 hours to assist in a complex procedure. "You have exceptional focus, Dr. Mitchell," he said. "We need more physicians with your dedication." While maintaining my outward compliance with family obligations, I began systematically separating my financial life from my parents. I discovered they had opened several credit cards in my name when I was a child. Something Grandmother Margaret tipped me off about during one of our new weekly phone calls. "Check your credit report, Amanda," she advised. "Your parents did the same thing to me years ago." Sure enough, I found 3 credit cards I'd never applied for, all maxed out. One dated back to when I was 16. I consulted with a lawyer, Catherine Jenkins, who specialized in identity theft. She helped me document everything without filing charges immediately. We'll build the case first, Catherine advised. Then decide how to proceed when you're ready. I opened new bank accounts at a different bank, redirected my paychecks, and began monitoring my credit vigilantly. I recorded every family conversation where finances were discussed and kept meticulous records of any time my parents asked for loans they never intended to repay. During this time, I discovered through grandmother Margaret that my parents' real estate business was struggling badly. Rachel had joined the company after college, and, despite having no qualifications beyond being the boss's daughter, had been put in charge of their largest development project, a luxury condo conversion that was now 2 years behind schedule and millions over budget. Your father mortgaged everything to keep that project afloat, grandmother confided. They're barely making payroll each month. I hired a private financial investigator to legally obtain public records related to the family business. The report confirmed what grandmother suspected. Mitchell Real Estate was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, propped up by dangerous loans and questionable accounting practices. Meanwhile, I maintained a perfect facade. I showed up to family dinners, listened to Rachel's complaints about incompetent contractors ruining her vision, and nodded sympathetically when my parents lamented the challenging market conditions affecting their business. I never let on that I knew how dire their situation truly was. During one Sunday dinner, Dad casually mentioned that they might need to borrow against the house again to cover some business expenses. "That's too bad," I said mildly, passing the potatoes. "Real estate can be so unpredictable." "You have no idea how stressful it is," Rachel complained. "You just show up at the hospital, do your little doctor thing, and go home. I'm trying to build something lasting for this family." I just smiled and changed the subject. The most surprising development during this period was my deepening relationship with grandmother Margaret. Now that she'd broken her silence about the family dynamics, she became increasingly transparent about family history and finances. During one visit to her home, she pulled out a large safety deposit box filled with documents. "I've kept records of everything," she explained, showing me decades of financial statements, property deeds, and old photographs. "Your grandfather made me promise to protect his legacy, and I've failed by letting your father mismanage it all, but it's not too late to fix things." She showed me proof that my parents had systematically drained her accounts over the years, convincing her to invest in failing business ventures or loan them money for emergencies that never seemed to end. But the most shocking revelation came when she showed me a sealed envelope marked "For Amanda, when the time comes." Inside was a DNA test report and a bundle of adoption papers. "Rachel isn't their biological child," grandmother Margaret explained gently. "They adopted her after years of fertility treatments failed. Then, surprisingly, your mother became pregnant with you naturally. You were the miracle they never expected." This explained so much. The golden child treatment, the overcompensation, the strange resentment my mother sometimes directed at me. I wasn't just the second child. I was the replacement child who arrived after they'd already invested emotionally in Rachel. And somehow, my very existence had trapped my mother in a marriage she had been preparing to leave. "Your mother was planning to divorce your father before she got pregnant with you," grandmother continued. "The adoption was supposed to fix their marriage. When it didn't, and then she found herself pregnant, she stayed out of obligation. I think on some level she's always resented you for that. The revelation didn't excuse their treatment of me, but it provided context that helped me process decades of emotional neglect. It wasn't about me being unlovable. It was about their own complicated feelings and resentments." As months passed, I continued building my case and my career. I purchased a small condo of my own, completely independent from family assistance. I changed my phone number, giving the new one only to grandmother Margaret and essential contacts. I started seeing a therapist to process the years of emotional abuse. And I waited, knowing that eventually, the house of cards my parents and sister had built would collapse. I wouldn't need to push it. I just needed to be prepared when it fell. What none of us expected was how quickly that would happen, or that Rachel herself would be the catalyst for the final collapse. Hey everyone, this story gets even more intense from here. If you've ever had to distance yourself from toxic family members for your own well-being, let me know in the comments. Your support means everything as I share these difficult memories. Keep watching to see how my sister's downward spiral changed everything. While I was quietly building my independence, Rachel's carefully constructed world began unraveling with alarming speed. Her marriage to Bradley Thornton, the son of a prominent local developer and my parents' dream son-in-law, had always seemed more like a business merger than a love match. They'd met at a real estate convention, dated for 6 months, and had a lavish wedding that cost more than my entire medical school tuition. The first crack appeared when Bradley discovered Rachel had been having an affair with their landscape architect. Not just a one-time indiscretion, but a year-long relationship conducted partly in the home Bradley had purchased for them. I learned about it when my mother called me in a panic at 2 a.m. "Amanda, you need to come over. Rachel is devastated. Bradley found her text messages and threw her out. She needs her family right now." I was just finishing a 36-hour shift. "Mom, I haven't slept in almost 2 days. Can this wait until tomorrow? This is your sister we're talking about. Her marriage is falling apart, and you're worried about sleep? I knew you were selfish, but this is a new low." So I drove to my parents' house, where Rachel was dramatically sprawled across the living room couch, surrounded by tissues and being fed ice cream by our mother. "He's threatening to tell everyone," she sobbed when she saw me. "He says he has proof and he'll make sure everyone knows what I did." "Maybe you shouldn't have cheated on him," I said, too exhausted to filter my thoughts. The room fell silent, Rachel's face contorted with rage. "Of course you'd take his side. You've always been jealous of me. You're probably happy this is happening." Rather than engage, I simply turned and left. That night marked the beginning of Rachel's spectacular downfall. The divorce was ugly and public. Bradley, it turned out, had evidence not just of the affair but of Rachel's systematic embezzlement from their joint accounts. She had been funneling money to support our parents' failing business, all while presenting herself as a successful businesswoman who'd married equally well. Within 6 months, Rachel lost the divorce settlement, any claim to the house, and most devastatingly to her, primary custody of their 2 children. The judge cited her erratic behavior and concerning lifestyle choices, diplomatic language for the alcohol dependency that had emerged as her marriage collapsed. My parents rallied around Rachel as always, but this time their support couldn't fix the problem. Bradley's family had deeper pockets and better lawyers. The social circle that had once embraced Rachel as Mrs. Thornton now shunned her as the disgraced ex-wife who had cheated and stolen. Rachel moved back into our parents' house, bringing her weekend visitation children and her growing collection of wine bottles. My parents converted their home office into a bedroom for the kids, spending money they didn't have on bunk beds and toys to make it special for the grandchildren. While this drama unfolded, I maintained a careful distance, showing up for obligatory family events but otherwise focusing on my career. I had been offered a prestigious fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery, putting me on track to become one of the youngest specialists in the field. Rachel's jealousy of my success intensified as her own life deteriorated. Her attempts to sabotage me became increasingly desperate and bizarre. The most egregious incident occurred during my final fellowship interview with the hospital board. Rachel showed up at the hospital, clearly intoxicated at 10 a.m., demanding to speak to me about an urgent family emergency. When the receptionist called me out of the interview, Rachel created a scene in the lobby, loudly accusing me of stealing her pain medication and abandoning the family when we need you most. Security had to escort her out while board members watched from the hallway. Dr. Winters, now my mentor, placed a hand on my shoulder afterward. "Family can be complicated, Amanda, but how you handled that situation tells me everything I need to know about your character. The fellowship is yours if you want it." I accepted the position, knowing it would mean even longer hours and more family friction. But I was prepared now, with boundaries firmly in place. My parents' response to Rachel's hospital incident was predictable. They called to inform me that Rachel was going through a difficult time and I needed to be more understanding of her emotional state. They suggested I move back home to help with the children when Rachel wasn't coping well. "She needs support, Amanda," my mother insisted. "Family supports family." "I support Rachel by not enabling her," I replied, "and I have my fellowship starting next month." "Always putting your career before family," my father said with disgust. "Meanwhile, your sister is trying to rebuild her life while raising children alone." I didn't point out that Rachel had visitation only 4 days a month, or that my parents were doing most of the actual childcare. I simply restated my boundaries and ended the call. What I didn't tell them was that I'd been documenting Rachel's concerning behavior around her children. Twice during family dinners, I'd witnessed her drinking heavily before driving the kids home. I'd found empty liquor bottles in her purse when she asked me to find her phone. I had recordings of her slurred speech during phone calls made during her parenting time. I wasn't planning to use this information. I wasn't vindictive enough to further separate the children from their mother, but I kept the records in case her behavior ever put the kids in actual danger. Meanwhile, Rachel's position in the family business was becoming increasingly problematic. Despite her obvious inability to manage projects, my parents kept her in charge of major developments. Clients began pulling out of contracts after experiencing her unprofessional behavior firsthand. Contractors refused to work with Mitchell Real Estate after too many instances of late payments and changing specifications. One evening, I received a call from my grandmother. Her health had been declining and she rarely left her house anymore, but she remained sharp as ever. "Amanda, I need you to come over tomorrow. I've made a decision about my will, and I want to explain it to you privately before I tell the rest of the family." When I arrived at grandmother's house the next day, she was sitting in her favorite chair, a thick folder of documents beside her. "I've been watching everything," she said without preamble. "Your sister's breakdown, your parents' enabling, the business collapsing, and I've been watching you, Amanda. Building your life quietly, with dignity and hard work." She handed me the folder. "I'm leaving everything to you. The house, my investments, everything. It's not as much as it once was. Your father convinced me to invest too much in the family business, but it's still substantial, and there are conditions." I opened the folder to find a new will, financial statements, and a handwritten letter. "I want you to use this inheritance to fix what's broken in this family," grandmother continued. "Not by giving them money, that would only enable more bad behavior, but by forcing them to face reality and rebuild on a healthier foundation." She squeezed my hand. "You're the only one strong enough to do it, Amanda. The only one who sees clearly." 2 weeks later, grandmother Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, Rachel showed up late and slightly disheveled. My parents spent the service whispering about the inheritance, assuming grandmother's estate would finally solve their financial problems. They had no idea what was coming. If you've been following this wild ride so far, thank you. Family dynamics can be so complicated, especially when money and favoritism are involved. Have you ever had to be the strong one in your family when everyone else was falling apart? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's continue with what my grandmother revealed that changed everything. The reading of Grandmother Margaret's will took place in the office of her attorney, Harold Greenberg, a week after the funeral. My parents arrived dressed impeccably. Rachel made an effort to look sober and respectable, and I came directly from the hospital, still in scrubs after an emergency surgery ran long. "You couldn't bother to change?" my mother whispered disapprovingly as we took our seats in the conference room. "A patient's life was more important than changing clothes," I replied quietly. Mr. Greenberg was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a precise manner of speaking. He began with the standard legal preamble before getting to the substance of the will. "To my son James and his wife Caroline, I leave my collection of family photographs and personal mementos with the hope that they will remember what truly matters in life." My father's face tightened. This was clearly not the bequest he had expected. "To my granddaughter Rachel, I leave my pearl necklace and the sum of $5,000, to be held in trust and released only for verified expenses related to addiction recovery treatment." Rachel gasped. "What? That's insulting! She knows I don't have a problem." Mr. Greenberg continued, without acknowledging the outburst. "To my granddaughter Amanda, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my home, all financial investments, insurance policies, and personal property not otherwise specified. This bequest comes with specific instructions contained in a separate letter, which I have instructed Amanda to follow according to her best judgment." The room exploded. My father jumped to his feet, face red with anger. "This can't be legal. Mother wasn't in her right mind. She was manipulated." Mr. Greenberg removed his glasses. "I assure you, Mr. Mitchell, your mother was of completely sound mind. We discussed her wishes extensively, and she was quite clear about her intentions. She also recorded a video statement explaining her decisions, anticipating this exact reaction. He pressed a button on a remote control, and Grandmother Margaret's face appeared on a screen on the wall. She looked tired but determined. James, Caroline, Rachel, if you're watching this, it means you're upset about my will. I expected as much, but this decision wasn't made lightly or suddenly. It's the result of years of observation and consideration. She paused, adjusting her glasses. James, you've been draining my accounts for years to prop up poor business decisions. The emergencies and temporary loans have totaled over $2 million that was never repaid. I enabled this behavior, and I'm partly responsible for the entitled attitudes it created. My father's face had gone from red to ashen. Rachel, I love you, but you need help, not more money to support your current lifestyle. The trust for recovery is my last attempt to give you what you actually need, not what you want. Rachel stood up, grabbing her purse. This is bull. My mother pulled her back into her seat. And Caroline, Grandmother continued, you've allowed resentment to poison your relationship with Amanda. I know why, and it's time Amanda knew too. My mother froze. Amanda was never supposed to be born, were you, Caroline? You were planning to leave James after the adoption was finalized. You had an apartment rented, divorce papers drawn up. Then you found out you were pregnant, and felt trapped. You've punished that child her entire life for existing. The room was deadly silent. My mother stared at her hands, not denying anything. I'm leaving my estate to Amanda because she's the only one who has demonstrated the responsibility and compassion needed to steward what remains of our family's legacy. The instructions I've left her are private, but know that she has my complete confidence. The video ended. Mr. Greenberg cleared his throat. There are some additional documents to sign. Shall we continue? The rest of the meeting passed in tense silence. As we prepared to leave, my father finally spoke directly to me. This isn't over, Amanda. Mother was clearly not in her right mind. We'll contest the will. Mr. Greenberg intervened. I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Mitchell. The separate letter contains information that would be problematic for your business if made public. Mrs. Mitchell was quite thorough in her documentation. My father blanched. What documentation? Tax records, I said quietly. Loan applications with forged signatures. Credit cards opened in Grandmother's name and mine. She kept everything, Dad. As my parents and Rachel left the office, I stayed behind to speak privately with Mr. Greenberg. There's more, isn't there? I asked once we were alone. He nodded, pulling another file from his briefcase. Your grandmother wanted you to have this after the others left. It's the complete financial forensic analysis of your family's business and personal accounts for the last 15 years. I opened the file to find hundreds of pages of bank statements, tax returns, loan documents, and a detailed report prepared by a forensic accountant. The situation is dire, Mr. Greenberg explained. Your parents have remortgaged their home 3 times. The business is effectively insolvent. And there's evidence of tax fraud that could result in criminal charges. Why would she want me to know all this? I believe, he said carefully, she wanted you to understand exactly what you're dealing with, and perhaps to give you leverage to help them change. That evening, I returned to my apartment and spent hours going through the files. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. My parents weren't just financially irresponsible. They were on the verge of complete ruin. They had leveraged everything they owned to keep funding Rachel's failed projects and lifestyle. Most shocking was the discovery that they had recently taken out a predatory loan against their house, the family home where I'd grown up, with terms that made foreclosure almost inevitable within the year. I also found the adoption papers for Rachel, confirming what Grandmother had revealed. Along with them was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandmother. Amanda, by now you know the truth about your family. You weren't unwanted, you were unexpected. Your mother's resentment has shaped your entire life, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I should have intervened sooner. You also know that your family stands on the edge of financial ruin, largely of their own making. They will come to you for money, expecting you to bail them out with your inheritance. If you do, nothing will change. Instead, I am asking you to use this inheritance to save them from themselves, not by giving them what they want, but by giving them what they need: accountability, boundaries, and consequences. The house they're about to lose? Buy it. The business they've mismanaged? Restructure it. but do not simply hand over money to be wasted. You have always been the strongest of us all, Amanda. Now use that strength to break the cycle of dysfunction that has plagued our family for too long. With love and faith in you, Grandmother Margaret. I sat on my balcony until dawn, reading and rereading the letter, looking through the financial records, and making notes. By morning, I had a plan, not for revenge, but for reconstruction. Grandmother was right. My family needed saving from themselves, and I was the only one who could do it. But first, they would have to hit rock bottom. And from the looks of the financial records, that moment was coming very soon. The Mitchell real estate implosion happened even faster than I anticipated. 3 weeks after the will reading, I received a frantic call from my father. "Amanda, we need to talk. It's about the business." His voice had none of its usual commanding tone. We met at a coffee shop, neutral territory. My father looked like he'd aged a decade in a month. He'd lost weight, his expensive suit hung loosely, and the confident posture was gone. "I'll get straight to the point," he said after ordering black coffee. "We're in trouble. The Riverview development is stalled, contractors are threatening lawsuits, and our operating line of credit is maxed out." I sipped my tea, waiting. "Your grandmother's inheritance. We need a capital injection to save the company. 2 million would do it." He slid a business proposal across the table. "I've prepared projections showing how we'd repay you within 5 years, with interest." I glanced at the document without opening it. "And if I say no?" His face hardened. "Then, 30 years of building this company disappears. 20 employees lose their jobs. Our family legacy is gone." "What about the house?" I asked. "I know about the loan, Dad." He looked startled, then resigned. "We'll lose that too, eventually, but the business is more important right now." "And Rachel? What's her role in this rescue plan?" "Your sister is going through a difficult time," he said defensively. "She'll step back from day-to-day operations while she focuses on her personal issues." I closed my untouched portfolio. "I need to review the company books before I can consider any investment. Complete access, no exceptions." "That's not necessary. The proposal has all the relevant—" "Those are my terms," I interrupted. "Full access or no discussion." After a tense silence, he agreed. The next day, I arrived at Mitchell Real Estate with a forensic accountant I'd hired independently, Marion Chen, a no-nonsense professional recommended by Mr. Pros and Arcan. Greenberg. The company headquarters had once been impressive, a converted Victorian mansion in the historic district. Now, the paint was peeling, the reception area unstaffed, and the atmosphere of bustling success replaced by grim silence. My father met us in the main conference room, visibly unhappy about Miss Chen's presence but too desperate to object. He provided login credentials to the accounting system and excused himself. "I'll be in my office if you have questions." For 8 hours, Miss Chen and I combed through years of financial records. The picture that emerged was one of systematic mismanagement, coupled with increasingly desperate attempts to cover mounting losses. "The Riverview project alone has lost 4 million, Miss Chen noted, pointing to a spreadsheet. "They changed contractors 3 times, redesigned after construction began, and purchased materials that were never used." "That was Rachel's project," I said, connecting the dots. "Whoever managed it had no business experience," Miss Chen replied bluntly. "Look at these invoices. They paid for the same work twice in several instances." By late afternoon, we had the complete picture. Mitchell Real Estate needed far more than 2 million to survive. It needed new management, restructuring, and probably bankruptcy protection to have any hope of emerging intact. I asked my father to join us for the summary. When Miss Chen laid out her findings, his initial defensiveness gave way to resignation. "So there's no saving it," he said quietly. "Not as it exists now," I confirmed, "but there might be a way forward with significant changes." I outlined my proposal. I would use part of my inheritance to negotiate settlements with the most pressing creditors and stabilize immediate cash flow issues. In exchange, I would become majority owner with full decision-making authority. My father would transition to a consultant role. Rachel would have no position in the company. That's a takeover," he stammered. "It's the only viable option," Miss Chen interjected. "Otherwise, bankruptcy is inevitable within 45 days. My father stared out the window for a long moment. I need to discuss this with your mother and Rachel. You have 48 hours to decide, I said, standing to leave. After that, the offer is withdrawn. That evening, predictably, Rachel called me, her speech slightly slurred despite it being only 7 p.m. You think you're so smart, don't you? Swooping in to save the day and push me out? That company is my future. Rachel, you're not in any condition to discuss this right now. Don't patronize me. Dad told me your conditions. No position for me? After all my work on Riverview? The project that's $4 million over budget and 2 years behind schedule? She gasped. That wasn't my fault. The contractors kept messing up my vision. Rachel, I'm not arguing about this. My offer stands. Talk to Dad. I hung up as she continued shouting. 47 hours later, my father called. We accept your terms, with one condition. Your mother wants to keep the house. The house is non-negotiable, I replied firmly. It's leveraged beyond its value. I'll pay off the loan and own it outright, or I walk away completely. Another long pause. Fine, draw up the papers. The following week, I signed documents taking control of Mitchell Real Estate and ownership of my childhood home. I immediately brought in a management consultant to restructure the company, focusing on the few viable projects while winding down the rest. Half the staff was let go, including several of Rachel's friends who held nebulous creative director positions. I negotiated payment plans with creditors, personally meeting with contractors who had been misled or mistreated. One by one, I rebuilt the relationships my family had damaged. The hardest meeting was with the entire remaining staff. Standing in the conference room where I'd played as a child while my father conducted business, I addressed the nervous employees. Mitchell Real Estate has lost its way, I began. But the company has good bones and talented people. My goal isn't to dismantle what my father built, but to transform it into something sustainable. I outlined the restructuring plan, emphasizing that while the transition would be difficult, those who remained would be part of building something better. I'm a surgeon, not a real estate developer, I acknowledged. I won't pretend to run day-to-day operations. That's why I've hired Michael Denning as CEO. I introduced Michael, an experienced property developer with a reputation for turning around struggling companies. The relief on the employees' faces was palpable. As the company stabilization progressed, my parents were forced to downsize to a small apartment. The day they moved out of the family home was somber. My mother walked through each room, touching walls and door frames as if saying goodbye to old friends. My father stood in his empty study, staring at the bare shelves that had once held awards and deal mementos. 30 years, he said quietly. Gone in a month. Not gone, I corrected. Transformed. The company will survive, Dad, just not as you imagined it. He nodded stiffly, unable to meet my eyes. Your grandmother would be proud. You're certainly executing her instructions effectively. This isn't about revenge, I said. It's about fixing what's broken. As they drove away from the house for the last time, I felt no triumph, only a strange mixture of sadness and resolution. The family dynamics that had shaped my entire life were finally shifting, but the human cost was real. Rachel's response to these changes was the most volatile. She alternated between rage, tearful pleading, and attempts at manipulation. When she realized I wouldn't budge on her role in the company, she tried a new approach. I need help, Amanda, she admitted during a surprisingly lucid phone call. The kids. Bradley's threatening to cut off my visitation completely. Says I'm unstable. Are you drinking right now? I asked bluntly. A pause. No. 3 days sober, actually. That's a start, I said. If you're serious about getting help, I'll support that. The trust grandmother set up can pay for treatment. You mean rehab? I don't need to be locked away, I just need… Those are my terms, Rachel. Professional treatment or nothing. She hung up, but 2 days later sent a text. Fine. Help me find a place. It was the first genuine step toward change from any member of my family. Small, reluctant, but real. The business stabilization continued under Michael's leadership. Within 3 months, the hemorrhaging stopped. Within 6, 2 of the troubled projects were back on track. It would take years to rebuild completely, but the immediate crisis had passed. As for the family home, I didn't move in right away. It held too many complicated memories. Instead, I had it thoroughly renovated, removing the physical remnants of old patterns while preserving the structure that had sheltered generations of Mitchells. The stage was set for the final confrontation, the moment when all the changes I'd set in motion would either heal the family or fracture it permanently. 6 months after taking control of Mitchell real estate in the family home, I invited my parents and Rachel, home from her first 90 days of rehabilitation, to dinner. Not at a restaurant where social norms might prevent honest conversation, but in the newly renovated dining room of what had been their house. I spent the afternoon preparing not just the meal but emotionally as well. My therapist had helped me script key points I wanted to make, and I'd rehearsed maintaining boundaries without escalating conflict. On the dining room table, alongside the place settings, I positioned 3 carefully prepared folders. The doorbell rang precisely at 6. Old habits die hard, and my father had always insisted on punctuality. I took a deep breath and opened the door. They stood awkwardly on the porch, my mother clutching her purse too tightly, my father trying to project dignity despite his obvious discomfort, and Rachel hanging slightly back, thinner and more subdued than I'd ever seen her. "Welcome," I said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. Their eyes widened as they took in the changes to the house. The dark wood paneling my father had insisted on preserving was gone, replaced by light colors and open spaces. Family photos that had prominently featured Rachel now balanced with equal representation of all family members. The shrine-like display of Rachel's trophies had been replaced by a tasteful bookshelf. "You've changed things," my mother said carefully. "Yes," I replied. "Would you like a tour before dinner?" They followed me through the renovated spaces, my father occasionally frowning at major changes, my mother making polite comments without genuine enthusiasm. Rachel remained unusually quiet, taking everything in with an unreadable expression. When we reached the dining room, they noticed the folders immediately. "What are those?" my father asked suspiciously. "We'll get to that after dinner," I said, gesturing to the table. "Please, sit." The meal passed with strained small talk. I asked Rachel about rehabilitation, and to my surprise, she answered thoughtfully. "It was harder than I expected," she admitted, "but necessary. I haven't been well for a long time." My parents exchanged glances but said nothing. After dessert, I cleared the plates and returned to stand at the head of the table, my father's old position. "Thank you for coming tonight," I began. "I know the past 6 months have been difficult for all of you, but it's time we had an honest conversation about how we got here and where we go from here." I slid the folders toward each of them. These contain documentation of the patterns that broke our family. I'd like you to look through them before we continue. My father opened his folder first, flipping through pages of financial records, emails, and transcripts of conversations I'd recorded over the years. His face paled. "You've been planning this for years?" "Not planning," I corrected. "Documenting. There's a difference." My mother's folder contained evidence of the credit cards opened in my name, her dismissive comments about my achievements, and the stark contrast in how she'd treated Rachel and me from childhood. Rachel's folder was the thickest, detailed evidence of her mismanagement at the company, transcripts of her drunken phone calls, and documentation of the multiple times our parents had bailed her out of consequences. "This feels like a trial," my mother said, her voice tight. "Are we being judged?" "No," I replied calmly. "This is an intervention, for all of us." I placed a 4th folder on the table and opened it. "These are the terms moving forward. I own the house and the controlling interest in the company. Those facts won't change. But how we relate to each other can." My father started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Please let me finish. For 29 years, I accepted the role you assigned me, the responsible one who needed no support, the afterthought to Rachel's golden child status, the daughter who existed to achieve but never to be celebrated." My voice remained steady, though my heart raced. "That ends tonight. I'm offering a reset of our family relationships, but with new boundaries." I outlined my terms. My parents could continue living in the apartment I now paid for, and my father could maintain his consultant role at the company, provided he adhered to professional boundaries. Rachel could return to a junior position after 1 year of sobriety, starting at the bottom and earning advancement through actual merit. "In exchange," I continued, "I require therapy. Family therapy for all of us, and individual therapy for each of you. full financial transparency. And genuine apologies, not just words, but changed behavior. The silence that followed felt endless. Rachel spoke first, surprising everyone. "I accept." My parents stared at her in shock. "What?" she said defensively. "I've spent 3 months in therapy already. Another year won't kill me. And honestly, I need the structure." My father's face flushed with anger. "This is extortion. You've taken everything, and now you're dictating how we live our lives?" "No, Dad. I'm offering you a path forward that doesn't involve bankruptcy and criminal charges for identity theft and tax fraud." I tapped the evidence folders. Grandmother documented everything, and so have I. My mother burst into tears. "How can you do this to us? We're your parents." "Yes, you are. And I'm offering you more consideration than you ever showed me." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "I don't want revenge. I want healing." "But healing requires accountability." Rachel laughed bitterly. "She's right, Mom. We've been awful to her for years, all of us." My parents looked at Rachel with bewilderment, unused to her taking my side. "Rehab makes you take a hard look at yourself," she explained. "At the pain you've caused others. I've been the worst sister imaginable, and somehow Amanda's still offering me a chance to fix things." Her unexpected support shifted the energy in the room. My father sat back, deflated. "The house is really gone, isn't it?" he said quietly. "The house is fine," I replied. "It's just mine now. And someday, when there's trust again, maybe we can create new memories here. But first, we need to heal the past." My mother wiped her eyes. "And if we refuse your terms?" "Then we go our separate ways," I said simply. "I'll still ensure you have the basics. I won't see you homeless or destitute. But the relationship ends here." The ultimatum hung in the air. My father looked at the financial documents again, reality sinking in. "We don't really have a choice, do we?" he finally said. "You always have a choice, Dad. Just like I had choices all those years I was treated as less than. I chose to work harder, to prove my worth, to keep trying to earn your love. Now you can choose to build something healthier, or you can choose to walk away." Rachel reached across the table and took my hand, the first genuine gesture of connection between us in decades. "I choose to try," she said. "I owe you that much, at least." My parents exchanged a long look, years of unspoken communication passing between them. "When does this therapy begin?" my mother asked reluctantly. "Next Tuesday at 4, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. "I've already scheduled the first appointment." As they prepared to leave, my father lingered in the foyer, looking up at the staircase where family photos now featured me alongside Rachel. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said, echoing his earlier comment but without the bitterness. "She always said you were the strongest of us all." "I learned to be strong because I had to," I replied. "Now I'm asking all of us to be strong enough to change." He nodded once and followed my mother and sister outside. Standing in the doorway of the house that had once been theirs and was now mine, I watched them drive away, feeling neither triumph nor resentment, but a cautious hope that the hardest part of the journey was behind us. The first 6 months of our family's new reality were more challenging than any of us had anticipated. Decades of dysfunctional patterns don't disappear with a single confrontation, no matter how dramatic. Our initial family therapy sessions were disasters. My father would sit stonily silent until provoked, then erupt in defensive tirades. My mother alternated between tearful victimhood and passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children. Rachel, still fragile in early recovery, would sometimes storm out when emotions ran high. I maintained my boundaries through it all, refusing to fall back into old patterns of placating or withdrawing. When my father threatened to quit therapy after a particularly difficult session where the therapist called out his controlling behavior, I simply said, "That's your choice, but my terms remain the same." He returned the following week. Meanwhile, the practical aspects of our new arrangement continued. My parents downsized their possessions as they adjusted to apartment living. The moving company I hired packed up their chosen items from storage, and I sat with my mother as she decided what to keep and what to let go. "This dining set was my mother's," she said, running her hand over a photo of the ornate table and chairs. "I always thought it would stay in the family home." "It can," I said. "If you'd like it in the house, I'm happy to bring it back." She looked surprised. You'd do that? Mom, I'm not trying to erase our history. I'm trying to create a healthier future. Small moments like this began to accumulate, tiny openings in the fortress of resentment my parents had built. Rachel's journey was the most visible transformation. With the structure of outpatient therapy, regular AA meetings, and the clear consequences I'd established, she began rebuilding her life from the ground up. 6 months into her sobriety, she asked to meet me for coffee, just the two of us, no parents involved. "I need to tell you something," she said after we'd settled at a quiet table. "Something I learned in therapy." She took a deep breath. "I've always known I was adopted. Mom and Dad told me when I was 12, but what I didn't understand until recently was how that knowledge warped everything." She explained how discovering her adopted status had created a deep insecurity, a fear that if she wasn't perfect, our parents might regret choosing her. "So I became what they wanted," she continued. "The star athlete, the social butterfly, the mini real estate mogul, but none of it was really me, Amanda. I've spent my entire life performing. And resenting me because I didn't have to," I said, understanding dawning. "You were blood. You couldn't be sent back." She smiled sadly. "In my mind, you were safe in a way I never felt. That's no excuse for how I treated you, but maybe it helps explain it." This conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. For the first time, we began to see each other as complex individuals shaped by the same dysfunctional system, rather than competitors in a zero-sum game for parental love. The family business stabilized under Michael's leadership, with my father gradually accepting his reduced role. His consultant position gave him enough purpose and status to preserve his dignity, while limiting his ability to make disastrous financial decisions. 1 year after our confrontational dinner, I received a call from Bradley, Rachel's ex-husband. She had mentioned they were communicating more positively regarding co-parenting, but his call still surprised me. "I wanted to thank you," he said without preamble. "Rachel is. She's different, present with the kids, reliable. Whatever you did, it's working." "Rachel did the hard work herself," I replied honestly. "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but something changed the trajectory. The kids have their mother back." He paused. "We're discussing modified custody arrangements. More time with her, now that she's stable." That evening, I walked through the family home, my home now, and realized how much had changed in a year. The physical renovations reflected the emotional restructuring our family was undergoing, preserving the foundation while creating healthier spaces, honoring the past without being imprisoned by it. In the home office that had once been my father's sanctuary, I reviewed the latest financial reports from Mitchell Real Estate. The company wasn't thriving yet, but it had stopped hemorrhaging money and was showing consistent small profits. More importantly, it was operating ethically. No more cutting corners. No more leveraging relationships for unfair advantage. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "1 year sober today. Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for not giving up on me." Later that week, during our now regular family dinner, held at a restaurant, we were making progress but weren't ready for the loaded symbolism of breaking bread in the family home. My mother surprised me by raising her glass. "To Amanda," she said quietly, "for having the courage to break the cycle." My father nodded stiffly but joined the toast. Rachel beamed, now comfortable in her role as my supporter rather than my rival. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, misunderstandings, and moments when old resentments flared. My father still occasionally tested boundaries, my mother still sometimes made thoughtless comparisons, and Rachel still had days when sobriety felt tenuous. But we were talking, really talking, perhaps for the first time ever, and in that ongoing difficult conversation, we were slowly finding our way to a new kind of family relationship. As our therapist reminded us, the goal isn't perfection, the goal is growth. A year and a half after the confrontation, I finally decided to fully move into the family home. The night before the move, I visited my grandmother's grave, bringing fresh flowers and a heart full of gratitude. "You were right," I said to her memory. "It wasn't about revenge. It was about breaking patterns that were destroying all of us." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and I could almost hear her familiar voice. "You were always the strongest, Amanda, the only one who could do what needed to be done." As I prepared to leave, I made her a promise. "The family won't be broken anymore, Grandma. Different, yes. Changed, certainly. but not broken. The next day, as the moving truck delivered my belongings to my childhood home, now truly mine in every sense, I felt a peculiar sense of completion. The circle had closed. The child who had once been forgotten in this house was now its owner and guardian, not as an act of retribution, but as a steward of healing. That night, I sat on the back porch watching the sunset, remembering all the family dinners I'd watched from the sidelines, all the celebrations where I'd felt invisible, all the moments of exclusion and dismissal. "You should have brought snacks. We won't order for you," my parents had said that fateful night, while my sister smirked and took another slice of pizza. They couldn't have known that small cruelty would be the catalyst for transformation, not just mine but all of ours. 3 years after the confrontational dinner that changed everything, I stood in the kitchen of what was now unquestionably my home, preparing for another family gathering. This time, though, everything was different. The renovations were complete, transforming the space from my parents' taste to my own. Gone were the dark, heavy drapes and formal furnishings, replaced by light colors, comfortable seating, and medical textbooks alongside novels on built-in shelves. My diplomas hung proudly in the hallway, no longer hidden away in a bedroom. The menu I'd planned reflected the changes too. Instead of the rich, heavy dishes my father had always insisted on, I was preparing a balance of comfort foods and healthier options. And most symbolically, I'd ordered an abundance of pizzas from 4 different restaurants, ensuring everyone's preferences were represented. My boyfriend Mark arrived early to help, bringing wine and flowers. We'd been dating for 8 months after meeting at a hospital fundraiser. A pediatric oncologist with a warm laugh and steady presence, he understood the complexities of my family history without judgment. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing me rearranging the napkins for the 3rd time. "A little," I admitted. "This is the first time we're all gathering here since everything." He squeezed my shoulder. "Remember what Dr. Winters told you before that first solo surgery? You've done the hard work. Now trust yourself to see it through." The doorbell rang, and my newly formed chosen family began arriving first, Dr. Winters and his wife, my mentor, who had supported me through the worst of the family crisis. Sarah, my best friend from medical school who had talked me through countless late-night doubts, and Michael Denning, who had transitioned from business savior to trusted advisor and friend. They filled the house with easy conversation and laughter, creating a buffer of support for what was to come. At precisely 5 o'clock, right on time as always, my parents arrived. They looked different now, my father thinner and less commanding, my mother with simpler, less rigid styling. They brought a houseplant as a gift, a small gesture that acknowledged this was now my home, not theirs. "The place looks lovely, Amanda," my mother said, and I detected genuine appreciation rather than the forced politeness of the past. My father nodded, taking in the changes. "You've made it your own," he said, and though there was a hint of melancholy in his voice, there was no anger. Rachel arrived last, alone but carrying a carefully wrapped package. 3 years sober now, she looked healthy and present in a way she never had during her drinking days. She had rebuilt her life meticulously, starting with a reception job at a different real estate firm, earning promotions through actual work rather than nepotism, and slowly rebuilding relationships with her children, who now spent alternate weeks with her. "Sorry I'm late," she said. "I wanted to finish this before I came." She handed me the package. Inside was a framed collage of photographs, me at my medical school graduation, receiving my fellowship award, pictures from childhood that I'd never seen before. "I found these in Mom's old albums," she explained. "They were there all along, just not displayed like mine were." It was perhaps the most meaningful gift she could have given me, an acknowledgement of the invisible history that had shaped me, now made visible. "Thank you," I said simply, hugging her. Dinner was served buffet style, allowing everyone to mingle freely. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily across the boundaries of family and friends. Dr. Winters shared hospital stories that made my father laugh genuinely. My mother and Sarah discovered a shared interest in gardening. Rachel and Mark talked earnestly about her children's education. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room for coffee and dessert, my father cleared his throat. "I'd like to say something if I may." The room quieted. My father had never been one for emotional speeches. 3 years ago, I sat in this room and thought I'd lost everything that mattered, he began. My business, my home, my authority. He looked directly at me. What I didn't understand then was that I'd been losing something far more valuable for years, my relationship with my daughter. With both my daughters, really. My mother reached for his hand, supporting him through this uncharacteristic vulnerability. Amanda, he continued, what you did was painful and humbling. But it was also necessary. Without your intervention, I would have lost everything, including myself. You saw what the rest of us couldn't or wouldn't see. He raised his coffee cup. So tonight, I want to thank you. Not just for saving the business, or even the family, but for having the courage to break patterns that go back generations. Tears pricked my eyes. This was as close to a genuine apology as my proud father could manage, and I recognized the enormous effort it represented. My mother spoke next. I've spent 3 years in therapy learning why I resented your existence, she said directly. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't your fault. You deserved better from me, Amanda. Rachel, never one to be outdone, added, and I was a complete nightmare of a sister. Sorry about that. The unexpected humor broke the tension, and everyone laughed. Later, as the evening wound down, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Grandmother Margaret's portrait, which I'd hung near the window where the morning light could catch it. We made it, Grandma, I whispered. Not perfect, but better. I thought about the long journey from that game night where I'd stood hungry and ignored while my family ate pizza without me. The wound of that moment had healed, leaving a scar that would always remind me of where we'd been but no longer caused fresh pain. As guests began to leave, I walked my parents to the door. My father paused, looking back at the house that had once been his pride. You know, he said thoughtfully, I always saw this place as the symbol of my success. But you've turned it into something better. A home where people actually connect. My mother squeezed my hand. We're proud of you, Amanda. I'm sorry it took us so long to say it. After everyone had gone except Mark, who was helping with cleanup, I sat on the porch swing, the same one where I'd spent countless hours as a child, watching stars while my family carried on without me inside. Penny for your thoughts, Mark said, joining me with 2 glasses of wine. I was just thinking about family, I replied. How sometimes the family you choose matters more than the one you're born into. And how sometimes, if you're lucky, they can become the same thing. He raised his glass. To family, all kinds. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on Grandmother Margaret's final gift. She hadn't just left me her money or her house. She'd given me the tools and the courage to rebuild what was broken, both in myself and in my family. The phrase that had once symbolized my exclusion, "You should have brought snacks. We won't order for you," now reminded me of how far we'd come. Because now, at any gathering I hosted, there would always be enough for everyone. Not just food, but recognition, respect, and belonging. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. My parents still sometimes slipped into old habits. Rachel still struggled with her sobriety on hard days. And I still carried the vigilance of the child who had learned to expect disappointment. But we were writing a new story, one choice at a time. And in that story, no one went hungry, physically or emotionally, ever again. I hope my story resonated with some of you out there. Family dynamics can be incredibly complex, and sometimes true healing requires difficult boundaries and honest confrontation. If you've been through something similar or are currently navigating family challenges, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. This journey taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable, even when it's painful. If my story has touched you in any way, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Sharing these stories helps others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for being here with me through this deeply personal account. Remember, family isn't just about blood, it's about who truly sees you and values your presence at the table. Take care of yourselves, and never settle for crumbs when you deserve a full place at the feast.